Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado. EWTN News In Depth is next.
Are you aware in any other states of an execution going astray because of an outside spiritual advisor?
No, Justice Kagan.
The Supreme Court looks at the legality of prohibiting chaplains in the death chamber for inmates on death row, how this case could impact religious freedom.
From my mom, I got her spirituality, and she taught me the desire to do God's will in all things.
Archbishop Nelson Perez shares his parents' influence on his faith formation. He weighs in on the church's response to the rise of Hispanic parishioners in the U.S. and the need for racial healing and dialogue in America. He is on the record.
The library came up with a really beautiful, innovative model for solving that problem and delivering more vocations into the arms of the church.
The obstacle that blocks nearly half of aspiring religious from answering the call, and how one organization is providing a pathway towards their final vows. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
That's exactly right, Your Honor. Texas being unwilling to tolerate a very small amount of risk in the death chamber, where a tiny amount of risk can lead to a situation that would create intolerable pain.
Religious freedom at executions. At the Supreme Court, the state of Texas defends their move to deny chaplains to death row inmates. Executions in Texas, the nation's busiest death penalty state, have been delayed while the court considers the question of what religious accommodations officials must make for inmates who are being put to death. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. The case before the justices this week involves John Henry Ramirez on death row for killing a convenience store worker during a 2004 robbery. Ramirez requested clergy be present to pray out loud and touch him while being given a lethal injection. He was denied that request, so he petitioned the High Court. His execution was delayed hours before it was due to occur back in September, after the Supreme Court intervened, agreeing to hear his case. Dr. Russell Moore, director of Christianity Today's Public Theology Project and fellow at the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, is here with us. He has written extensively about the death penalty and joins us now to discuss the implications this case will have on religious freedom. Dr. Moore, it's great to have you here. This issue has been up and back to the Supreme Court since 2019. Why is clergy in the death chamber so important?
Well, I think some people think that this is a minor issue, not only because they don't understand religious freedom, but because they don't understand the importance of prayer and of clergy. Having someone with one when death is imminent is something that all Christians share, and certainly in the free church tradition, where there aren't sacraments in the same way that there would be in, say, the Catholic Church. And so having someone to pray alongside one, this is pretty basic religious practice, and it doesn't bring a lot of risk to the state.
At argument, the justices seem to be asking for guardrails about how to think about this issue, particularly the issue of laying of hands and prayer with touch, to develop this nationwide standard that they're looking for. And they cited safety concerns, which you just talked about. Can you explain why that's an issue?
Well, every constitutional right has people saying, well, what if this goes too far? Yeah, you can see that with freedom of speech. You can see that with freedom of assembly. You can see that in every area. There isn't an outrageous request being made here. It really isn't the fear that after allowing this to happen, that there will be entire congregations gathered for worship services in the death chamber. That's not what's on the table here. This is a really reasonable and limited request of something that is not unusual for people who are dying. And so I don't think that the guardrails are really the problem here. Certainly a chaplain through a secure system in the criminal justice system, that's not going to be a threat to anyone's safety.
And there was a nun that was featured in the New York Times this week who was talking about what this means for us as a country. This issue started in 2019 with a Buddhist prisoner who wanted to minister. We've seen this happen with other denominations. What can you tell us about what this issue says about our country?
Well, it says that often we don't think that religious practice is all that important. You can see that in multiple ways, where people will assume this is a minor thing. Someone really doesn't need this. But for someone who is dying, having those around him to pray, that is important. That's of ultimate concern to that person. So the sort of waving away of religious practices, that tells us something really disturbing about our country, and hopefully we can turn it around.
I hope so too. It says something about how we value life, especially now that the Supreme Court is taking up that issue as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Moore.
Thank you.
The Catechism notes the death penalty was long considered an appropriate response by authorities to certain crimes as a means of safeguarding the common good. But the modern popes, including St. John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis, have all expressed opposition to the death penalty. Pope Francis tightened the Church's position further in 2018, declaring that the death penalty is inadmissible because it's an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. The Holy Father released a video message to the World Congress against the death penalty in 2019.
La pena capital supone entonces una grave vulneración del derecho a la vida que tiene toda persona.
Pope Francis said that the condemned must be offered the possibility to change. Over the summer, the U.S. Department of Justice issued a moratorium on federal executions, citing concerns the death penalty is used arbitrarily and its disparate impact on people of color, a move applauded by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Archbishop Paul Coakley, chairman of the USCCB's Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development, and Archbishop Joseph Naumann on the Committee of Pro-Life Activities, issued a statement saying the Catholic Church has consistently taught that every person is created in the image and likeness of God, and for this reason, we consistently uphold the sacred dignity of all human life. The USCCB is also supporting the removal of capital punishment on the state level as well. The USCCB will be meeting next week for its Fall General Assembly. EWTN will broadcast the opening Mass and stream the meetings online. Download the EWTN app or visit EWTN.com to watch. An important voice at next week's General Assembly will be Philadelphia's Archbishop Nelson Perez. He is one of only 3 Hispanic archbishops in the United States and currently sits on the USCCB's Committee on Cultural Diversity. I sat down with him last week to discuss his role as a shepherd of the church. Here's Archbishop Perez on the record.
Archbishop Perez, it's so wonderful to be here with you on the Feast of St. Charles Borromeo here in St. Martin's Chapel at the seminary, where you just celebrated Mass a few minutes ago.
Yeah, this morning we had Mass, we had the celebration of candidacy where men formally declared and the church accepted them as candidates for holy order. So it was beautiful.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was beautiful
Praise
and
God.
moving, and it's always a special day here at St. Charles. I did it here in this chapel myself. I was ordained a priest of Philadelphia.
Oh.
So I've sat in these very pews during my time in seminary formation. And so it's still surreal to walk into this very chapel now as the Archbishop of Philadelphia.
I think it's
Never thought it was
fantastic.
gonna happen.
The Holy Spirit is wondrous in its ways.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about how being Latino informs you being an archbishop? It's a unique thing nowadays.
It is unique. There's only 3 of us, you know, Archbishop Gomez in Los Angeles, Bishop Gustavo Garcia Siller in San Antonio, and now me. It's very humbling, number one. It's very humbling for me to be one of 3. I think it is the Holy Father's understanding also of the presence of Hispanics and Latinos in the United States. We know from the 5th Encuentro that 61% of Catholics in the United States at this time, 18 and under, come from a Hispanic background, from 20-something different countries that inform that word, right? So you do the math.
That's exactly right.
Right? You do the math. So to me, it's a great source of joy. I don't see myself, Montse, as a Hispanic bishop or a Latino bishop in that sense, because to me, in that sense, that doesn't really exist. I'm a Catholic bishop who happens to be
That's right.
Cuban background. I was born in the United States, but my parents came from Cuba.
Tell us a little bit about them.
My parents have, like the story of many Cuban refugees. So when I hear about immigrants and refugees, it resonates in my heart. My father, at the age of 25, managed some 20-something banks in Cuba. He was a banker.
Wow.
And my mother and my father and my older brother, God rest his soul, came here in 1960, and I was in my mother's womb. So I already existed,
That's
right? From natural birth to natural death, Nelson already existed.
Yes.
Right? He just hadn't shown up yet. But he was on the plane.
Yes.
I was in Cuba.
Yeah.
Right? And but they left that day. They left their house and the place where they lived, where you and I left the places where we lived, never to go back, with a hope that somehow things would change, and they didn't. And they didn't. My father, who was a banking executive, his first job in Miami was selling Domino sugar door to door.
Door to door.
Door to door. And then he moved, New York is the banking capital of the world. So he moved himself and us, I had already been born, to the New York metropolitan area, where he got his first banking job as a teller. Now, this is a guy that managed a bunch of banks, now have to work as a teller, and had to go learn English. And with his broken English, over time, he retired as a senior executive vice president of a bank in New York.
Wow, from the bottom up.
As a teller, right? So I admire that a lot. And my mom, the woman of great faith. So I got from my dad, I got the practicality of addressing issues.
Right.
And his steadfast faith. From my mom, I got her spirituality, and she taught me the desire to do God's will in all things, which is not easier said than done.
Right, and to trust in Him.
So in a lot of ways, they were great teachers to me without even knowing that they were teachers in that way.
Knowing this story and how it informs your spirituality, do you think that our church today is underinvesting in the Hispanic community?
I think it still has to wake up a little bit, right? I still think, I think a lot has been done, right? I think the fifth encuentro was, for the church in the United States and the people of the United States, a wake-up call in a lot of ways, and the bishops have been wonderful in the support of that. It's a fifth encuentro because there were 4 others.
Right, and it's this coming together to address.
To listen to the voice of the Spirit. The Holy Father has called us to a spirit of synodality. Well, that was, in a sense, a synod without being called that.
Right.
But it was bringing people into dialogue, which is such a favorite word of the Holy Father that He's now called us all to, right? To walk and dialogue together and see where the Spirit is guiding us. And the fruits of the fifth encuentro are still yet unfolding.
Right.
Right? But yes, I think we've still got some ways to go, but we've also come a long way as well. In many ways, where I sit right now and what I do right now is a testament to the church recognizing that.
It's proof of that.
And I say that with all modesty because that has nothing to do with Nelson Perez. It has to do with the fact that the church has listened to the voice of the Hispanic people. And so while I don't see myself as a Hispanic bishop, but as a Catholic bishop, I also know that I'm a Cuban American too.
That's right.
At the same time, right? And I understand the significance of that.
There's something beautiful when we walked into this wonderful chapel. You have the altar from El Día de los Muertos.
Right.
All Saints, All Souls, right?
Dios en noviembre, yeah.
That's right, where the Mexican American community or just Mexican community celebrates and prays for their dead. How do you deal with that diversity? A lot of people think the Latino Hispanic community is homogeneous, but it's really diverse, as you mentioned, 27 countries.
It's actually very rich. I'm sure your mom and dad and your family won't say that they're Hispanic, they say they're Mexican.
We're Mexican, yes.
My mom would say, right? My mom would say, well, they're Cuban.
Yeah.
Right? In the same way that people who speak English don't say that they're Anglos, they say they're Irish, Scottish, British, or Australian, right? So there's a beautiful diversity and richness to it. And at the same time, you'll find in the Hispanic, Latino world that the Mexican wants to be a Mexican, And the Cuban wants to be a Cuban, and the Puerto Rican wants to be Puerto Rican, and each bring a richness that's united by language and actually faith and spirituality.
That's
that
beautiful.
we wear on our sleeves.
We do, but it informs who we are and our identity as Catholics.
It informs who we are and how we live.
That's right. Archbishop, you were part of the response to the social unrest and all of the different race issues that happened in the last 2 years. How did you address that, and why did you think that that was so important?
There was a lot of social unrest here in Philadelphia. We were one of those places where thousands and thousands of people walked in peaceful protest, right? Because the hurt of racism is underneath the skin. All you need to do is hit it, right? I walked on a Sunday afternoon with about 150 young adults praying the rosaries through the streets of Philadelphia. But then it all went away, right? But the hurt of the sin and evil of racism did not.
That's right.
And so I met with our Black Catholic community. From there came the notion, the idea, the movement of the Spirit to establish the Archbishop's Commission on Racial Healing and Dialogue. And so they began their work. But it's about racial healing and dialogue. And it represents people from the suburbs, the city, and different races as we all come together to talk to each other. Because that's where healing actually does happen, when we hear each other's stories.
And why is the church such a unique place and the right place to have these discussions?
Jesus was a healer. Jesus was a healer. It was a big part of his ministry. And the church humbly holds the place of being the sacrament of Christ in the world. So the church has to be a healer.
You've been so instrumental in helping me think through these issues, and I hope that our viewers will share in thanking you for what you've done for us.
Thank you, Montse. Always a pleasure. You're the best.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias.
In preparation for the upcoming Fall General Assembly, I also asked Archbishop Perez about his thoughts on the USCCB's Eucharistic Coherence teaching document that focuses on worthiness to receive Holy Communion, a document some say weaponized the Eucharist to put pressure on bishops to deny communion to pro-abortion Catholic politicians.
We have this document that's coming out of the USCCB that's also causing great division, with some people who want a very pastoral approach to Eucharistic cohesion, to that understanding of who we are as Catholics and how we bring that into the public square, and some who want a political approach, where they want people to be publicly censored or censured for the way that they advocate for abortion or undermine church teaching publicly. What can you tell us about how we should think about that?
My hope for that document, as well as the Eucharistic revival, is that we all, as Catholics, deepen our love for the Eucharist. Because if we do that, then the Lord will take care of the rest. That we deepen our love for the Eucharist and then put our hearts where they need to be. And that means defending life, it means defending the poor, it means defending the immigrant, it means walking with those in need, it means a lot of things, right? But I pray that what we do and how we do it will bring us together to deepen our love for the power, the transformative power of Christ in the Eucharist that has transcended time.
Follow EWTN News In Depth's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels to see more of my discussion with Archbishop Perez, including his thoughts on the Supreme Court hearing on abortion cases and other exclusive content. Be sure to like, comment, and repost. Up next, calling for leaders to put on a pro-life lens when creating policies and allocating funds for adoption and foster care in the U.S. A panel discussion with two women leading the charge. Up next.
All these men and women from different parts of the country, different communities, all together in one room, sharing about their charisms, about their communities, about how God has called them, about their vocation story, and it's incredibly inspiring.
Special classes that open the doors for men and women to enter religious life. EWTN News In Depth will be right back. Living out the Catholic social teaching of honoring the dignity of the human person and our call to family through the lens of adoption. Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. November is National Adoption Month. The Catholic Church has always played a role in caring for orphans in the United States. Ursuline nuns founded the first documented orphanage in what is now the United States back in 1727. And today, Catholic Charities provides a network of adoption and foster services across the country. According to the most recent data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Adoption and Foster Care Analysis Report, when looking at a snapshot of September 30th, 2019, there were nearly 424,000 children in the foster care system nationwide. That same day snapshot shows that of the more than 248,000 children who exited the system during that year, the largest percentage, 47%, were reunited with parents or primary caretakers. 26% were adopted. 11% went on to live with a guardian. Where these children wind up is an important part of the conversation. It's a point that Catherine Lopez made while receiving this year's National Council for Adoption's Media Excellence in Adoption Award. Catherine is celebrated for being a champion for adoptive families and emphasizing the importance of access to reliable adoption information in her work. Catherine, Senior Fellow at the National Review, joins us now, along with Naomi Schaefer-Riley, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, who recently released a book about major concerns for child welfare and the foster system. We'll get to that book in a moment. Thank you both for joining me today. Catherine, congratulations. We're celebrating National Adoption Month and also your award. You were just honored for your coverage of this issue. Talk to us about why Catholics, in particular, should care about it.
Well, anyone, Montse, who prays the Liturgy of the Hours, the prayer of the Church, knows that we're constantly being reminded that God cares for the widows and the orphans, and so we must too. And as Catholics, we kind of have a disadvantage in some ways that we have these huge institutions that we often contribute money to. And so we kind of assume that someone is taking care of that issue. And we don't think in terms of what are the needs around my parish? Who are the foster families in my parish? Has anyone adopted in my parish? Can we help them? Can we rally around them, wrap around them with love? And if you have a foster child who is in the foster system, who is obviously, they very often have many issues that involve trauma and other things. So Catholics really need to get more involved in asking those questions. What are the needs?
And those are very practical points. Naomi, you just came out with a book that stresses that we should all be adults in dealing with welfare policies, the policy battle. What has changed in how we look at these issues, and what still needs to change?
So unfortunately, thank you, Montse, for having me, but the child welfare system really seems to revolve these days around the needs and sensibilities and desires of adults and not the best interests of children, which is quite unfortunate. Those 424,000 children that you mentioned in the foster care system, the average amount of time that they spend in the system is 20 months. In states like New York, where I live, it's actually 30 months. And then a significant chunk, as many as 20% of kids, are spending upwards of 3 years in the system in this kind of temporary holding pattern. And we are not finding them safe, loving, permanent homes, in part because our court systems and our child welfare agencies think that the most important interests are those of their parents and their families, who are sometimes trying to rehabilitate, sometimes not. But we really need to be thinking about how we can make sure that kids have the proper attachment, development, and that they get into these homes as quickly as possible so that they can grow up in a normal life.
In a stable environment, for sure. Catherine, tell us about how the foster care crisis has changed with the COVID-19 pandemic. Has anything made it worse? Is it better? Are there more resources?
Well, if you're an adult who is in a stable situation, you had a hard time during COVID. Imagine what it was like if you're in a home where there's abuse and the child is not going to school, so there are no other adults to see the signs of abuse. Worse, definitely worse. And I just have to say, Montse, I appreciate you mentioning the National Council for Adoption Award, but Naomi's book is essential reading. And I think especially for pro-lifers, this is an issue that we don't often think about, and we need to. Naomi writes very powerfully about how ideology has crept into the foster care system. And these are things that we, again, don't talk about in the way that we should. These are fixable problems, but it's going to require people to actually pay attention.
That's right. Naomi, tell us about recruitment and retention of parents and host families for these children. How do faith-based agencies and charities stack up? Is it ideology that's a great barrier for them? Tell us about that.
So I think we've seen kind of a revolution in a lot of churches and faith-based agencies. A lot of evangelical churches, frankly, have really stepped up in the last 10 or 15 years. They've completely revolutionized the way we recruit and train and support foster families. They realized that putting up a picture of a child on the nightly news was not a very effective recruitment technique. And now you have pastors who literally go into their pulpits and they say to people on a Sunday morning, these are the 6 children in our zip code who need a home tonight. And that is a very urgent and powerful message. They also add a lot to the training for foster parents. Instead of just telling parents, like, these are the number of fire extinguishers the state requires you to have in your house, they're adding all sorts of important information about trauma-informed care for these kids and really providing people with the tools that they need. And finally, they're providing that support that Catherine talked about, looking around you in your community and seeing ways that you can help, even if you are not fostering, thinking about ways you can support, whether it's providing respite care or building furniture or just praying for other people in the community. Half of foster parents quit within the first year because it is very hard.
And they need a community to come around them and support them. Catherine, you've written about that, but you've also written about the barriers, the ideological barriers for some of these couples. Tell us about that in the training that Naomi was mentioning.
Well, as Naomi writes about in her book, there's really actually torture that some of these foster parents in training go through. We have a mutual friend who, because she and her husband are not Black, and they were adopting biracial children, fostering first, they really were traumatized, being told that they were stealing their children from their heritage. And the fact of the matter is there are more white parents who are available to foster and adopt than Black children. And so are we going to penalize the child because there aren't more Black parents to foster and adopt? No, we can't do that. And I just want to say one quick thing too, Montse, the work that you do in your day job at the Beckett Fund has been so important in this realm. To have the faith-based agencies to be able to operate, to provide that wraparound care and really walk parents through the whole process, and it's essential. And so the religious liberty aspect is very crucial, as well as the very practical things, because the practical are affected when laws keep faith-based charities in this realm.
And they have to do what they do, inspired and animated by their religious beliefs. And so it's great to know that in this country we can do that. Naomi, last question for you, just about policy recommendations. What can we do? What should we do coming around in a bipartisan way to help children?
Yeah. So, Montse, there are 2 really important pieces of legislation that we passed in this country in the 1990s, and those pieces of legislation are regularly flouted. The first one is called the Adoption and Safe Families Act, and it says that if a child has been in foster care for 15 of the last 22 months, a state is supposed to move to terminate parental rights. And what that means is we're putting a time limit on foster care. We're saying this is not a permanent place for a kid. And there was a bipartisan support for this idea. And now you have kids who are in foster care for 3, 4, 5, even more years at a time because we're ignoring that law. The second really important law is the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act. And it says we cannot discriminate on the basis of skin color when it comes to placing children for foster care or adoption. We had amazing progress in this country since that law was passed. Tens of thousands more Black children were able to find permanent, safe, loving homes as a result of that law. And now I tell you, there are people who are trying to overturn it, who think that matching skin color is more important than finding those homes for children. And it is absolutely a shame.
Well, we're grateful for your work, Catherine and Naomi, for your expertise. I hope that you'll have a megaphone to be able to help these children because we know our Lord loves them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, inflation, infrastructure, and blasting off to space. Top headlines in our weekend review up next.
I realized at that moment that everything I had worked so hard for, all of this stuff that I had surrounding me that made me a successful businesswoman meant nothing.
A successful life by any measure grows more enriching after a call from God. A faith journey towards vocations still to come.
Present! Or!
and prayerful respect for our brave military men and women on Veterans Day. EWTN News in Depth will be right back. News that directly hits your wallet tops the week in review. Consumer prices are on the rise and the largest jump in the inflation rate in 30 years. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says prices have jumped 6.2% over the past year, the biggest increase since 1990. With this inflation rate, economists say if you don't get more than a 6% pay raise this year, you're essentially taking a pay cut. Labor shortages and increase in demand for goods and supply chain problems are all contributing factors to the price hikes. At the Port of Baltimore Wednesday, President Biden announced a short and long-term port plan to tackle backlogged ports and inflation. Ships have been waiting to dock and unload for weeks. Biden's plan includes immediate use of excess grant money to help free up dock space and speed freight movement. The Biden administration says the massive infrastructure bill, which passed in the House last week, will help ease inflation. Already approved by the Senate, it pumps $1 trillion into improving the nation's roads, bridges, and waterways, and more. Here's the Transportation Secretary.
But what all of these investments have in common is that they will create jobs. Pipe fitters to replace those pipes, electricians to install those EV charging stations, auto workers to build the cars that plug into them. We need mechanics maintaining transit vehicles, drivers operating them, construction workers rebuilding those roads and bridges. And most of those jobs will be available whether you have a college degree or not.
President Biden will sign the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act on Monday. In the wake of the landmark report that confirmed extensive sexual abuse of minors from the 1950s to 2020 by priests in France, bishops announced a program of renewal this week to allow victims compensation. The shocking report indicated that over a 70-year period, some 216,000 minors were abused by clergy. That number jumps to 330,000 victims when you include lay people in the church who abused minors. French bishops will sell part of the church's extensive real estate holdings to compensate thousands of victims. They also established a group dedicated to supporting the church's efforts to address and prevent abuse. The European Union and the U.S. are preparing new sanctions over Belarus on the crisis at the border of Belarus and Poland. Thousands of people, mostly from the Middle East, have been camping out as temperatures fall below freezing. Some 15,000 Polish soldiers are protecting Poland's border. The EU and U.S. are accusing Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko of manufacturing the crisis as retribution for sanctions placed on Minsk a few months ago.
Ignition and liftoff.
A SpaceX rocket carried 4 astronauts into space on Wednesday night. Their 6-month mission at the International Space Station includes science experiments, space station maintenance, and spacewalks. This launch marks 600 travelers who've been to space, ranging from those who barely scratched space to astronauts who've spent more than 1 year in orbit. America honored its military this Thursday on Veterans Day. From a wreath laying and speeches at Arlington National Cemetery to a military flyover. This was the first Veterans Day in 20 years that the U.S. has not been at war. Celebrations were held across the nation, and Veterans Day coincides with Armistice Day, marking the anniversary of the end of World War I. Earlier in the week, Arlington National Cemetery opened the plaza surrounding the tomb of the unknown soldier to the public for the first time in nearly 100 years. People were invited to approach the tomb and lay flowers in honor of America's service members to mark the anniversary of the funeral for the unknown soldier in November 1921. The tomb is guarded 24 hours a day, year-round, by members of the Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment. Precious moments with our Savior during evening Vespers. That's still to come.
They're the future of the church, and thanks be to God, Labouré gets to unlock the door of formation for them.
Building the church one vocation at a time. How the Labouré Society supports future church leaders and how you can support them too. A great need for more church leaders. Parishes around the world are suffering from a shortage of priests and women religious. Contributing factors to the decline include growing secularization, the ongoing sexual scandals, financial scandals, and more recently, the pandemic. According to the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA, the total number of priests in the United States has dropped by tens of thousands from 1970, when there were more than 59,000 priests, to 35,000 in 2020. The number of religious sisters took a drastic dive in the last 50 years as well, numbering more than 160,000 in 1970, down to a little more than 41,000 in 2020. The drop in those entering religious life is concerning. Those considering a vocation can face many obstacles while discerning if it's the path to which they're truly called. That can include a lack of family support or finding the right mentor to guide them. An even more tangible barrier to many looking at a vocation is debt. To enter into religious life, one must be clear of significant financial obligations. According to the Labouré Society, an organization that helps pay off the debt of those considering a vocation, of the 10,000 people currently discerning a vocation to the priesthood or religious life in the United States, nearly half are blocked from pursuing their call by outstanding student loans. I spoke with the Associate Director of the Labouré Society, Elizabeth Marcolini, to get a better understanding of the organization and its work supporting the next leaders of our church. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this important topic. Tell me about the Labouré Society and its mission.
Montse, thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to be on and to share more about the good work that Labouré is doing. So Labouré was founded back in 2003 to meet a need in the church that honestly I didn't even know existed until I met Labouré, which is the increasing student debt crisis in relation to religious life. The Labouré Society is providing a solution and to date has delivered over 300 men and women into religious life that were prevented because of their student loans from college or graduate school. We've helped doctors, lawyers, nurses, artists, all sorts of people from different walks of life who were told to basically go and take, 5 years to pay off their debt before being able to pursue the vocation God gave them. So Labouré came up with a really beautiful, innovative model for solving that problem and delivering more vocations into the arms of the church.
That's so beautiful. And we know that whatever happens in the secular world does affect our church. So this debt crisis around students is something that no one really thinks about affecting the church, but it does. About 40% of vocations are turned away because of existing debt. It makes sense that debt would be a barrier, as vows of poverty don't really make for easy loan repayment, right? How many people?
Exactly.
Right. How many people and what kinds of people are helped by the society?
Yeah, so we help people from all across the United States. As long as their loans are within the United States, we can help them. We've helped people, though, who actually have ended up in orders in other countries. Benedictines in Norcia, we have a past aspirant who's now there. We help men and women, actually a majority of women who are religious sisters, I think primarily because, most women's communities require vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, whereas some dioceses have thresholds, right, or stipends they give priests that can help mitigate like low levels of student debt. But the average student debt that, as we see across the country, this is a familiar conversation to anyone who's tuned into the news on this topic. It continues to increase. So with Labouré, we see the same. We see rising levels of debt, but not through irresponsibility, just people who wanted to be a doctor and felt that God was calling them that way, or, they went and got a great degree and they were teaching and God called on their heart and pulled them into this beautiful vocation. We don't want the door to be closed to those vocations just because they were doing what they believed was God's call for them in their college days, right? To go to school, what so many people do, the majority of Americans do, right? When they go to college is maybe they get scholarships, they work out financial aid, but there's still some level of debt. So, that was the need that Labouré was meeting early on when our founder met a woman who was wearing a large miraculous medal. St. Catherine Labouré is the visionary of the miraculous medal. And she was unable to enter the Carmelite convent because of her debt. And when he heard that, he said, you don't used to have a vocation, you do have a vocation. And our job as the church is to help make a way for that vocation to become a reality because you're in service to us, right, the body of Christ.
That's so beautiful. You were talking about St. Catherine, and in her time, the barrier was a dowry, and in modern times now it's debt. How does the society actually practically work with aspirants, those hoping to discern a vocation?
Great question. Yeah, that was a funny coincidence what you mentioned about the dowry. We didn't know that when it was called the Labouré Society, but we later found out that St. Catherine herself was prevented from joining and someone had to pay for her dowry to enter the convent. It's such providence. But practically how the program works is we have 2 classes every year that are called boot camps. So to participate in a program, you have to apply through our website, rescuevocations.org. You go to the site, see if it's a good fit for you, where you are in your vocational discernment. We work with the community and the aspirant. Any order that's within the canon of the church, right, that's magisterially accepted, we'll work with. And what happens then is they go through a really state-of-the-art training process over the course of that 4 days. We have a special system for them online that has courses. We bring in amazing trainers, walk them through the idea of biblically based fundraising. And then they work together as a class, not just to mitigate their debt, but to mitigate each other's. So it's such a beautiful model that every time we have a class, I see it as the best of the church. You see a Dominican and a Franciscan and a diocesan priest and just all these men and women from different parts of the country, different communities, all together in one room, sharing about their charisms, about their communities, about how God has called them, about their vocation story. And it's incredibly inspiring. They're the future of the church, and thanks be to God, Labouré gets to unlock the door of formation for them.
That's so beautiful.
So throughout that 6 months, they work and fundraise together. And then at the end of that, based on merit and how much they've raised, we grant them an award towards the payment of their student loans.
That's fantastic. Is there a difference in those approaching Labouré? Are there more priests or more nuns, women religious? They tend to consider their vocations earlier, right? So they're less likely to have debt.
Yeah, great question. So we actually see more women, I think, because a lot of men will discern with the diocese, and because of the thresholds that dioceses have, sometimes men won't come to our program as often. I believe we're still at about 60% women with our program. And the average age of an aspirant, gosh, I'd have to look back, but I think that we're probably mid to late 20s. They're by and large young, but it's the sort of men and women that are called maybe after some type of professional career. So they're really, a lot of them are very seasoned. They're not, 18 years old, but they come with kind of a more interesting some more interesting life experience that I'm sure God is going to use in great ways in their vocation.
And we've seen so many reports about the need for vocations for immigrant populations. They're greatly needed to serve the church. Are they hindered by debt, or might their parents be discouraging their vocation because they're needed to provide for the family?
Yes, believe it or not, that's something we walk with a lot of our aspirants on, is families who are not supportive for the reasons you mentioned, whether it's I expected you to be, an accountant or a doctor or whoever, and now you're not, and our family's alone. And so there is a little bit of that. And we certainly have served a lot of men and women from different immigrant populations. We see a lot of men and women who are Spanish speakers and from just all these amazing different walks of life. But it's a great thing to pray for. If you pray for vocations, which I hope you do, I hope you pray for the men and women who are trying to answer God's call, because they often face a lot of obstacles to saying yes.
Liz, let's talk about the future then. Many have said that the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, are more likely to consider a vocation. What's driving that?
I think it's the beauty and kind of blooming of the church and tradition. I think I look at a lot of these communities that are flourishing. They're ones that are really vibrant, steeped in the magisterium, steeped in the truth, beauty, and goodness of the church as it was traditionally understood. So we see that a lot through Labouré, just through the communities who are coming to us. And I'm so inspired by a lot of these young men and women. I think that because they're seeing better, younger examples of a religious life or priestly life lived well, it's invitational, right? They want to be a part of this world because it's being lived in a beautiful way.
That's so wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. And we'll be sharing the resources both to support and accompany through prayer these vocations that need our help.
Thank you so much, Montse.
The Labouré Society has assisted more than 300 people into formation to the priesthood or religious life. If you are discerning a vocation and looking for financial assistance, or if you want to support the future leaders of our church, you can visit the Labouré Society's website at rescuevocations.org. If you feel God's call and need some help in discerning if a religious life is right for you, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops website has a list of resources and tools to help. There's also a prayer for vocations on the website, and we hope you will pray to support those on a journey to religious life. Nearly 190 years of forming priests. Next, we visit St. Charles Borromeo Seminary to discover its interesting history of hosting saints and popes, and for an evening of prayer. But first,
for me, I just knew this is what I'm made for. I'm made to be a bride of Christ.
One woman's faith journey to committing her life to Jesus. Money, title, and a comfortable lifestyle. One woman had all the material possessions she needed, but that life was unfulfilling. God had a greater mission for her, to become his bride. From our Vatican Bureau, Rachel Lance has this week's faith journey.
Sister Maria Silva is the Director of Administration at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, where she handles all the financial transactions. But this is not Sister Maria's first time in a leadership role. Before becoming a nun, her business skills brought her success in New York City.
Everything I had worked so hard for, all of this stuff that I had surrounding me that made me a successful businesswoman meant nothing.
Though she felt the calling to religious life at 18 years old, her devout Catholic parents had different expectations.
So I was supposed to fulfill that desire on their part and be highly successful and take care of them in their old age.
Through determination and hard work, she was managing 3 Bronx car dealerships by the age of 30.
When I was in the car business, I was living under my parents' roof, and they were, I was making all this money and I could buy whatever I wanted for the first time in my life. I could go shopping and say, what do I do? I want the blue suit and the black one. What do I do? I'll just get them both. I can afford it. And now, and I started living that mentality.
But something was missing.
I had just moved into a lake house, and I had just finished decorating my bedroom because my dream when I was a little girl was I wanted to have a Victorian princess bedroom. And I had a couch in front of my bed, and against the wall, I had my TV off. It was turned off. I sat down on the couch, and I looked at my reflection in the TV. And then I looked outside the bay window that overlooked the lake, beautiful lake. I looked back at the TV at my reflection and I said, I could give this up all tomorrow and it wouldn't make a hill of beans difference. I realized at that moment that everything I had worked so hard for, all of this stuff that I had surrounding me that made me a successful businesswoman meant nothing.
May Almighty God grant you His grace.
At the age of 31, Sister Maria joined the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, in 2007, making her final vows in 2015.
I, Sister Maria Silva, make to God in your hands the simple vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience.
Her profession even caught the attention of Oprah Winfrey.
When you get out into the world, do you not think, wow, iPads? You never think about that? No.
Joy and sorrow can exist side by side. 3 months before I made my final vows, my mom died. And one of my biggest prayers, I don't want to get upset. I still miss her. It's been 5 years. I miss her so much because, we're made for relationship. I knew I was living my vocation because there was still joy in my heart, even though my heart was breaking because my mom wasn't there.
The difference between walking down the aisle with your dad and, seeing your husband at the end of the aisle, it's only going to last a certain amount of time. But for me, my love is eternal. In other words, I'm a full-fledged bride of Christ. Can you believe it?
God uses our past to sanctify the future, to sanctify our present. He uses everything we've learned for His greater glory, if we're open to the grace, right?
Applying what she learned as a businesswoman in the Bronx, today, Sister Maria Silva is continuing to fulfill her vocation in the Eternal City. In Rome, Rachel Lands for EWTN News in Depth.
We can believe it. Thank you to our Rome Bureau for sharing Sister Maria Silva's journey to religious life with us. Here in the U.S., there are men on their journey to the priesthood. St. Charles Borromeo Seminary is the oldest Catholic institution of higher learning in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Founded in 1832, it has educated thousands of priests for service. It has been visited by popes and saints, including Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Francis, and Mother Teresa. The seminary has given honorary degrees to a few notable people, including Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and EWTN's foundress, our very own Mother Angelica. This year, there are 149 seminarians enrolled in St. Charles Borromeo. We wanted to share part of their day with you, evening Vespers. While not all Catholics know all of the prayers said during Vespers, there's one prayer that we all know. It's our highlight in our Images of the Week. We'll be praying for those seminarians as the next leaders of our church. That does it for our broadcast this week. Join us again next Friday for in-depth coverage of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' Fall General Assembly and the main takeaways that will impact Catholics in America. See you then.